There are multiple ways to keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast. Through our Instagram handle, the Wolf Connection Pod. And for comments and questions, send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. We are very excited to get this individual on before the International Wolf Symposium in Minnesota coming up in just under a month, 20 some odd days, I think, as we were just talking about. She is a wildlife biologist and has been in that position for just around a decade at Denali National Park in Alaska. She joins us from Denali Park in Alaska. She's Bridget Borg. Bridget, it's awesome to meet you. Thank you for squeezing us into your very tight and busy schedule today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is really interesting. It's what I'm finding is when looking at the symposium and looking at all the incredible individuals who are going to be there, it's just one right after the other. And I believe you're doing one of the main speeches in the beginning of the symposium, which is very, very cool. But we want to really understand where did you come from? Where did you grow up? How did you get to Alaska? I know I was looking in, I think you were in Florida for a little bit, and you went to school in Wisconsin. So how did this all come together, and how have you gotten to Alaska and Denali specifically?
I grew up in Minnesota. So as a young kid, I played outside in a pretty rural area of Minnesota. You know, I grew up across from a soybean field. And really enjoyed just exploring and being outside. Definitely one of those kids that was either probably inside reading or outside, you know, playing some imagination game, something like that. So, you know, I grew up really loving being and playing outside. As I went through school in Minnesota, you know, and went to school in Madison, I had, you know, a lot of passion for reading and literature, but also just had this kind of innate interest in science. And so I was trying to figure out how to balance that in my education, and really gravitated towards a lot of the like kind of hard sciences. And, you know, I was taking a lot of physics and calculus and all these classes like with pre-med students. And that didn't quite click for me. You know, I didn't have that competitive side of me that wanted to like be the pre-med student, even though I had an interest in all of that stuff. And I remember at the time, a friend of mine taking a class in ornithology, which is, you know, the study of birds. And I just remember feeling really jealous, like, why? That's so interesting. Like, why does she get to study that? And I think that was kind of a moment for me to be like, oh, I could study that. Like, that could be something I could do as well. And I think it's interesting, you know, growing up, you don't always have a good perspective as a kid of like what you could actually do or what you could actually like make into your profession. And it really took until college to think of like, oh, wildlife ecology, like, boom, that it clicked and it felt so right. And definitely spoke to me and my interest in but yeah, it's kind of interesting that I feel like I came a little bit later to the game, knowing that was something I could pursue professionally. So I made the most of it. From then, I started taking wildlife ecology classes. I graduated with a degree actually in zoology because it used a little bit more of my hard science background, and conservation biology as well as a major. And so I was really interested in just exploring the world of wildlife work, and wanted to start doing seasonal work because I knew that provided a lot of opportunities for traveling to different areas and learning about different ecosystems and different wildlife. So I did a study down in Santa Fe National Forest. We did some fisheries work. I also learned how to do some interpretive work. So, you know, discussing the natural history of an area and interpreting that or giving a presentation to people and helping them understand some of the natural life around them. And then I got a job banding neotropical migrants in the Florida Keys. And this was a really great job where I got to go out every day and, pull these little birds from mist nets and band them and weigh them and learn about them. And we also did some vegetation studies. It was really great. And so I think I was just kind of exploring a lot of kind of what the wildlife realm had for me. And one of my earlier positions was through the Student Conservation Association. And this is a really kind of a great gateway for a lot of people who I think get positions in agencies, in the Fish and Wildlife or the National Park Service. And so I got a call, my application was still active with the SCA. And I got a call one day when I'm down in the Florida Keys, and it was actually from somebody up here in Denali. And she had gotten my application and she said, "Hey, I don't think this is exactly the position you applied for, but I'm really wanting to know if you'd be interested in coming to work up at the sled dog kennels in Alaska." And I mean, how can you say no to that? So I was like, of course I'm interested. And so, I remember at orientation for employees in Denali that year, there was a question of, who came the furthest for this job? And I was like, well, I came from the Florida Keys to Alaska, so yeah, it might be me.
I think it's me.
Yeah, so it was actually working with a canid of another sort that brought me up here to Alaska and really instilled a love for this area. I think it was, as I'd been going around and doing some seasonal work, really interested in different areas, but nothing felt like coming home like Alaska did to me. And it just really spoke to me in a way that I knew that I wanted to stay for a while. I didn't know quite where that was going to take me at the time. But I got to work with the sled dogs in the summertime, again, giving demonstrations, telling people about the role of using dogs to travel in the park in the wintertime and help maintain the wilderness character of that area by using this non-motorized transport. It was actually one of my first trips in the winter, running a dog team with my boyfriend, now husband, and we crested the road. There's one road into the park here, but it's closed at mile 3, and so it becomes just kind of a trail packed with snow. And we crested this portion of the trail / road at that point, and we saw a pack of wolves file across the road in front of us. And we were just like so amazed, but also pretty new to the area. We came back and we told the kennels manager about this experience, and she's like, "I've never seen wolves from a dog sled." And we were like, "Oh, you've been here a long time." Like that was, that we realized how special that was. And I think about that story a lot and that connection and just how, at that time I didn't know or couldn't have anticipated being in the role that I'm in now, where I get to study these animals and be the one who knows exactly which path that is, crossing the road and all of that about them. So,
man, that's awesome. It's almost like you said, coming home or a rebirth for you. It's like you went away from Minnesota, you went down and did everything in the Keys a little bit, and now you're back. Does it feel like home now? It must, since you've been there for so long and you've had your roots there. How does it feel for you?
Yeah, it certainly is home for me. After that first summer, I never really left, and I've made my career here. And also, I'm raising my family here. So I have a real strong love and connection for this park and this area outside of the park as well.
Wow. Just tell everybody too, what is Denali like? Because most of the people that we speak about, Yellowstone is really the go-to. People love Yellowstone National Park. It has the seasons. I believe Denali has that a little bit, but just really give everybody an inside look of the environment, the topography, what people can expect if they were to go to Denali and start looking for wolves. I know that there is wolf watchers up there. So what's it like when you're really in it?
Alaska is large, as we know. Like it's a huge state. And Denali itself, this park inside of Alaska is also huge. It's over 6 million acres of land. So, this land was, it incorporates, I guess, a lot of variation when you think about all that area. So from the park entrance where I'm at right now, where there's, kind of a range of like spruce trees, deciduous trees, we have aspen and birch trees all around here. It might look similar to some areas in kind of the boreal forest down in the lower 48. But we have a lot of topography as well, right? So our park encompasses a large portion of the Alaska range. So we've got Denali, the highest mountain in North America here. And so a lot of really rugged mountainous terrain, glaciers that extend miles and miles and miles. And then we have we have boreal forest zone, and we also have areas with, just tundra, we have alpine, we have seas of just kind of homogeneous lowland black forest as well, black spruce forest as well. So a lot of variation in our seasons are, we have a lot of seasonality, but our seasons are kind of condensed. So, our spring is a short amount of time. We have a short summer, and we're, I think maybe it's starting to feel like fall for you guys now. Our fall is like over. I'm looking outside and the leaves are falling off. I mean, we're very much in the tail end of fall for us. And so snow is, we have termination dust, what we call on the mountain ridges around us. And, snow is sticking up higher elevations.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when we talk about what people might see of this, so that's kind of describing this really big area, right? And sometimes I get to see that, but usually it's like from up high in a plane. What people see is a little bit different. So there's the park's highway runs from Anchorage to Fairbanks, and along that highway is the park entrance road. So there is one road that leads into Denali National Park. It's about 92 miles long. Right now it's curtailed. It's about half as long because we've had a major landslide along a portion of the road that goes up along a kind of a high mountainous portion of the road that has experienced some landslide and slumping. So that road distance is curtailed right now as they look for solutions for dealing with that issue. But this is really what people are going to experience. So they're going to most often get on a bus. We have a controlled visitation access program where people mainly are hopping on a bus and driving that portion of the road. And the bus drivers and the people there are going out for the purpose of wildlife watching, mostly, scenery as well, hoping to see the mountain, which you can from several places. But really the behavior of the vehicles is that they're traveling slowly, and they are, looking for seeing grizzly bear or seeing dull sheep, caribou, moose, or perhaps a wolf.
Give everybody too, because this environment is probably fairly unique, I would think, in North America, because we've talked with multiple individuals about not just Yellowstone, but then you have the Wisconsin, Minnesota range, Minnesota, where you're formerly from, and some of the parts, the sea wolves there, and the northern part of Washington into Vancouver Island and things like that. So are there any, because you've been studying wolves there for close to a decade, is there anything that you can give us about, are they any different? Are they larger? I know we've talked with Bob Hayes, who's in the Yukon Territory, where wolves tend to be a little bit bigger. Are there any generalities physically, behaviorally, that you've noticed over your time that differs wolves in that area from the ones, say, in the lower 48?
I'm just going to talk a little bit more broadly about wolves up here in Alaska, just to start with. So, wolves were never listed under the Endangered Species Act here in Alaska. Wolves have always existed pretty much in a somewhat continuous population through Canada and into Alaska. While, we know that the lower 48 experienced basic, extermination of wolves for much of their range. So wolves have always sort of coexisted here with their prey and humans. And there's always been some level of hunting or trapping, sometimes people for sport or recreation, or for subsistence as well. So that's kind of a big context to place, I think, us here in Alaska. I think that some of the ways in which we look at wolves are probably a little bit different because of that different history in a way. In terms of, like physical differences and how they relate to the environment, one big difference here when we think about wolves as they exist, like in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Yellowstone, is that they exist at a relatively low density up here. So, again, kind of going back to the basics, we have shorter growing season. We don't have the same amount of primary productivity or vegetative growth. That means that in turn, we don't have the same density of ungulates. So while we still have large ungulates like moose and caribou, Dall sheep that are here, they exist at kind of a lower density in general. So we have a lower kind of biomass available for wolves. So wolves in turn, wolves in turn exist here at a relatively low density. They need to encompass a lot more territory to have the prey base to support themselves. So that's another kind of difference between probably a lot of the other areas that we've that you might have covered before in the podcast. As far as size and what they hunt, prey size, pack size, pack size can be very variable even within the park here. So we have different kind of ecoregions, and so wolves are doing different things at different places, and how that prey base is at one point in time may kind of determine how big packs can get. So we have a relatively heterogeneous or diverse sort of area here on the eastern side of the park, where we have some mountainous regions, also some low-lying riparian areas. So we have caribou that come up into some of the kind of our long windswept plains as well. So we've got caribou, moose, and Dall sheep out here. So we can have packs that maybe have a little bit smaller territory, a little bit larger pack size, as opposed to further out west, where we have that more kind of homogeneous, black spruce forest and just a kind of low density of moose and maybe some caribou in there now and again, which may have, packs of really large territories and, relatively smaller pack sizes. So there's quite a bit of diversity there, and that just really depends on what they have for prey base. Size-wise, I'd say female wolves here are usually around 80 to 90 pounds, and 120 pounds for a male is actually a pretty big male for us here. So they're not huge. Sometimes I like to compare. I'm not a person that's very large in stature, so sometimes I'll actually lay down for comparison when we're working with a wolf that we're capturing to put a collar on, because sometimes I'm working with animals that are just about my size or a little bit bigger.
Okay, so diving into what you're just touching on, what is I assume the primary prey choice for Denali wolves is caribou, but what just give us a rundown of a Denali wolf pack's menu in order of preference, and maybe even what smaller species might they tap into when it's required, either because of pack size or weather, which we'll touch on.
I would say that when we think of these ungulate species that we have moose, caribou, and Dall sheep. Moose are probably the most biomass in our area. So, just by virtue of that, their moose are going to be one of the primary prey. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now some packs can have shown adaptations or hunting behaviors where they will hunt Dall sheep a little bit more often. Mostly those are packs that basically they have Dall sheep within their range. And then, yes, obviously caribou are a source as well. And we can actually see variation in our wolf and caribou populations together, and knowing that caribou population is having some effect because it is a really important prey for them. I often think of some of the smaller prey that they have available. That's something that really comes into play often in the spring and summertime months, when they're focusing a lot of their movements around a central area. They may be able to take advantage of smaller prey as they go out to hunt individually. So taking advantage of snowshoe hare, we've seen beavers, and then obviously the just young of our ungulates, so lambs, caribou calves, and moose calves as well.
Doll sheep, man, that has to be a hard hunt.
Yes.
I mean, I assume moose is a really hard hunt too. The landscape they hang out in, that has to be a really hard hunt. Are there packs that exclusively eat Dall sheep as their main source of large prey because they've become specialists and they're passing down this knowledge through generations? Or is this, or would it just any wolf pack in Denali know how to hunt a Dall sheep if they came across them?
I think that there is some level of pack knowledge that is probably, maintained for the wolf packs that have Dall sheep within their range. That not to say that wolves that newly come into that area wouldn't, through trial and error, be also able to maybe figure out some of that. So Dall sheep primarily escape predation by having escaped terrain, meaning something really rugged that they can access that wolves really can't. And we've seen this as we go out and do some aerial tracking. We've seen these images where maybe there's a wolf on top of a steep ridge, and the sheep using their escape terrain to basically avoid predation. I think that those sheep can't stay there forever, so there could be a wait and kind of waiting out game. Sometimes it happens. And also, sheep aren't always in their escape terrain. Like, they also are in lower areas where they're trying to obtain some nutritious food and vegetation that's not directly close to escape terrain. So finding them outside of escape terrain is also that's a very vulnerable time for those Dall sheep. So again, some packs and individuals may develop certain hunting behaviors that allow them to kind of maximize how much Dall sheep they can have. But I don't think there's any pack right now that could survive just on Dall sheep alone. It's usually
okay, yeah,
it's usually one source out of several that they're using. And sometimes that can really be based on the population as well. Like, our Dall sheep population is not at its highest, so it's probably not a time to be a successful specialist in Dall sheep.
You were talking about pack size too before, when we were just talking about how big their terrain is. Have you noticed that there's less, I guess, sort of pack conflict? Because it seems as though Denali is huge and massive, and that with lower density of biomass of all of these prey and predator items, that there's going to be less conflict. Is that something that you've noticed throughout the years, or do those things still tend to happen around carcasses and things of that sort?
So are you talking about conflict within a pack or between packs?
Between packs.
Yeah. Well, one of the primary sources of mortality for wolves living in Denali is actually being killed by members of an opposite pack.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it is common, even though these territories are very large, there are areas where that conflict occurs. And often it can be the source at the site of a kill. So if there's a large resource on the landscape, it can be, even if it's not technically another pack's territory, they will sometimes find themselves both at one resource at the same time. And so we often, if we find a wolf that has been killed by another pack, we often note that there's like sign that there was a kill nearby that was kind of primarily that source of conflict. So it still does happen. It's still a primary source of mortality for wolves within Denali.
Stephen, I think, was reading something of yours, and he probably has a better idea, more about the, you know, we're going to touch on weather, Stephen. You probably have a better go of it than me. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was reading this. I was just perusing your articles there, and there was one that seems really cool to me. Can you just give us a crash course sort of summary on the document you worked on called The Role of Weather and Long-Term Prey Dynamics as Drivers of Wolf Population Dynamics in a Multi-Prey System? I have a few questions about it, but we'll start with, when you say a multi-prey system, what species are being suggested there?
In Denali, we have wolves that are that have the primary prey of moose, caribou, and sheep. So they're in this multi-prey system where they have, many large ungulates to choose from. What's interesting about this paper is that we have an index, which kind of gives us an idea of relative amount of change of other prey population, which is primarily the snowshoe hare. So the snowshoe hare, as we all probably understand, it has some sort of like cyclical population change. And through the work of actually our ornithologist here in the park, Carol McIntyre, she has an index where she can kind of track that change from year to year. And so we have this kind of data point from year to year that we can also see like when the hares are at highs. And we actually experienced like an abnormally high for a period as well. And so when we were doing this analysis, we were curious to see if we could see a signal in wolf population demographics, in meaning how survival or the number of wolves that are added to a pack changes, if we could actually see a signal from that pulse in small prey availability. And that was one thing that we thought was really interesting, was that we could see that effect on the number of wolves that were added to a pack in the following year based on how many hares there were. So basically indicating that the availability of this kind of small prey on the landscape actually has an impact on some wolf demographics. So that was, I think, really interesting. We've seen documentation from other studies in other areas that, of course, wolves prey on small prey, and snowshoe hare or Arctic hare being documented, and Tom Gable's work on, beavers and voyagers, obviously showing that beavers can be used as prey as well. But seeing that impact from that next level, being like, of course, we know that they prey on them, but actually it has an impact on how many basically pups are added, is really interesting.
Yeah. So you mentioned these population cycles, which we've touched on a little bit in other episodes, but and that these happen in a lot of different prey-predator relationships, like lynx and their prey. And generally we would ask, like, how do these populations affect each other in terms of just raw numbers? But the study is finding that weather, particularly snow, plays a bigger part in population sizes and raw numbers, which we've never heard that take before. Can you just give us a rundown of how that works and what you found as it relates to snow, and how, because the confusing part was, well, it's not confusing anymore because I read it, but so it a lot of times I think we talk about population sizes in the most obvious way, which is the more of a prey species there are, the better that wolves will do. But in some years it was the reverse, and the driver was weather.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, and that wolves are not necessarily responding. As caribou numbers say increase, wolf numbers are not necessarily always showing this really clear-legged increase following that, because the story is a lot more complex. And this actually goes back to some of the history of the wolf research study. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about the history and kind of legacy of this project in general. But, in some of, just to start with this idea of the role of climate and snow in particular, Dave Meach was one of the founders of the study that began back in 1986. And he, with a number of other collaborators, looked at kind of the first, roughly decade or so of data and understood this concept at that time that, when we have a really deep snow year, there's multiple impacts to the ungulates. So first we can think about, okay, deep snow, that just makes it harder for ungulates to get around, right? They are these long-legged animals with these relatively kind of, pointed hooves. And so although they can splay out a little bit, maybe get a little traction, they're punching through that deep snow. And so that's really limiting mobility. Well, wolves are quite a bit smaller than these ungulates with these nice canid paws that spread out and give them a little bit more of an advantage in that snow. So their mobility is a little bit easier. They can float a little bit more on some of those things. And so when, caribou or moose get bogged down in that deep snow, that makes it easier for wolves to prey upon them. Now, we can also think about the other side of snow is that for, say, caribou or Dall sheep in particular, that snow is covering up their nutrition source. It's covering up their food. So it's harder to move around. It's also harder to get at food. So you can see how that impact to their overall fitness is just kind of compounded in those situations. And that's really when wolves are kind of poised to be able to take advantage of that a little bit more. And so those are conditions where we see the wolf population being able to respond to those conditions. So basically, we can think about, when we think about prey, we think about prey availability. That might just be like the numbers. This is how many caribou there are on the landscape. That's how many prey are available. But that does not mean that all of them are vulnerable to predation. So prey vulnerability is actually a more important driver of wolf population responses than just the number on the landscape.
We've all seen videos of wolves hunting in the snow, and it's clear that they have an advantage when ungulates are in deep snow. But it's just amazing that it's more of a driver than just overall numbers. I think that was really surprising to me. But what's at the extreme, what does this mean for wolves in terms of climate change?
Yeah, that
Or what could it mean?
A really great question. We tend to think that, as generalists or, relative generalists, wolves have an ability to prey switch. So they can switch from one prey to the other when one comes available or not. So they are sometimes poised to take advantage of changing conditions, whereas other animals that are more specialists, like we think of our alpine specialists, like say Dall sheep, where they really need alpine environments for their habitat, for their food source, and for their escape terrain. Those sort of habitats that are more threatened by climate change, those specialists might have more hurdles, I guess to say, and maybe wolves will be able to take advantage of that. So it kind of depends on, there are a lot of ways in which, climate change predictions can go. One of them is that we would have, warmer air holds more moisture, and we're going to have more snow. So in those scenarios, we can see that we might have increased prey vulnerability, and that might in turn help wolves prey on more vulnerable, this more vulnerable population.
So what's because I know you've studied a lot of this dynamic, though, that wolves and caribou, it seems specifically, are really interrelational. There's a huge balance. Talk about why that relationship, I guess, is so important, because there's history behind there too, right? With caribou up in Alaska, and with the general population, and then wolves being there as well. Why is that dynamic so important?
Yeah, I think it's a really big, broad topic to think about, wolves and caribou in Alaska, because there are, a number of caribou herds throughout Alaska, and wolves existing throughout all their ranges. And this question of how wolves and caribou interrelate has been studied in many different areas. And I think each different study area has something to contribute and has a little bit probably different scenario as well. So might be a little much to talk broadly on all of it, but one thing that that is really unique about Denali is not only do we have this long-term research program on wolves, but we also have a parallel one on caribou. So I know you've talked with some of the lead researchers of other long-term studies across North America. We think of Isle Royale as being one of the longest running research on wolves and their prey in an ecosystem. Well, the history of wolf and caribou research is actually really long in Denali as well. And we can go back to the 1930s when Adolph Murray came here and did some of the kind of first research on wolves. So, this is really interesting for a lot of reasons. It was against a backdrop of changing understanding of the role of predation in functioning ecosystems. And so, this concept was being put forth, had kind of, I guess, come about or was first put out there really with Darwin and thinking about how, the forces that can shape species over time. Predation is an important one, right? By essentially, preying on animals that are more sick or maybe have other weakness, we kind of move towards a fitter population over time. But understanding this role of predation and changing how people, who had typically thought as predators strictly as competitors and thinking that predation needed to be, predators needed to be pulled out of the equation, that was a burgeoning idea that was really kind of happening, in the early 1900s. And by 1930, this idea that predation had an important role to play and that maybe even national parks could be the kind of proving ground of where we want to maintain these ecosystems that survive with that natural balance of predation and valuing predation and predators as well. And that was really pretty seminal. So Adolph Murray came here in Denali kind of against that backdrop. And what had happened was that there was a series of severe winters that had led to a decline in the Dall sheep population. At the time, they just knew that the sheep population declined. At first, they thought, obviously wolves are to blame. We should start some wolf control. But they paused wolf control, and then they had Adolph Murray come out and actually study this interaction a little bit more. He did study caribou as well, and he hiked thousands of miles, collected hundreds of skeletons of Dall sheep, and he also observed wolves here. This is at a time when wolves didn't exist in most of the lower 48. So studies on wild wolves, that really wasn't possible anywhere else. So Adolph Murray came here and he found this opportunity in the open expanses of the tundra in Denali to sit and observe a wolf pack for, thousands of hours. And his understanding and research led us to kind of the first ideas of how a pack is formed primarily of family members. And also he, through his research, understood a lot of these animals that had died and the resulting population decline, these animals were not in great condition. And so it was really kind of starting to understand that, wolves were maybe not they were maybe sometimes the ultimate or, they were, they weren't the only cause of this decline. They weren't able to take advantage of the sheep's vulnerability, or they were able to take advantage of the sheep's vulnerability, but at times maybe because the conditions again. So understanding that predation had a role, but it was really the role of like climate and severe winters that probably caused a lot more of that population decline. So this really, again, is providing information and starting to help, people's ideas of the role of predation evolve. So following that research, there was some independent researchers who continued monitoring, but they were only able to really focus on like one pack at a time, just by nature of this area being really big. And so Gordon Haber was a researcher who really primarily followed the kind of trajectory of an individual pack. And then it was in 1986 when there was actually a series of poaching incidents. They found that wolves, just killed inside of the park boundary. And managers at the time realized, hey, we do not really know what's going on with the wolf population across this broad area that we are now mandated to protect for wildlife protection. So that was what helped kick off the more formal study of wolves back in the 1980s. This was led by Dave Meach, Lane Adams, as well as John Birch and Tom Meyer. And parallel with this study on the wolves, they also started a study around the same time looking at the Denali caribou herd population trajectory. So now at this point, we have, decades of research of these two species kind of side by side, which is really valuable. I think you guys have talked about, the value of long-term research and just how unique that is. And I think sometimes Denali is a little bit of a, Denali doesn't always get talked about in that, I think it's
right.
We're a little hidden gem sometimes.
Wow, that was like a complete history lesson.
Yeah, sorry about that. Get a little long-winded.
That was amazing.
No, not at all.
I have a question about hares. So, what part do hair play in the wolf population size? Meaning, I could be wrong, but I believe that what the study was suggesting, and I think, was that, okay, so ungulate populations are up 1 year. It's a bad snow year. So wolf populations go up because they're more successful. The next year, the snow load is lower maybe. There's not as much access for wolves to big ungulates, but they have this booming population from the success of years prior. So they turn to hair to subsidize?
Yeah, so when we look at these long-term trajectories, we are saying, okay, the population changes in 1 year to the next, and we essentially are looking at these other variables that help us describe that variation. So yes, we can see that snow, cumulative snowfall comes out as a big effect, as does with some effect of the prey numbers as well, but it's really that vulnerability component. But we also see this effect of hares, and what we saw the effect of hares was mainly in the amount of wolves that were like added to a pack. So we call that natality.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so that's like how many. Basically, it's kind of a it's kind of a way of saying like how many pups are born, although we're not measuring it directly as pups born, just in how much the pack increase. So it could also be from other wolves coming into that pack, say. But we do see that, the amount of wolves that are added to a pack in a year, we see an increase when their hair numbers are high. And so that might mean, again, that we have some effect where the wolves are in good condition because they have this secondary prey source.
Right.
It's pretty easy to take advantage of. When they're high on the landscape here, sometimes as you walk through the willows or something, it's like the ground is moving almost. And that's a dramatic way to describe it.
Yeah.
Not entirely the ground is moving, but you see just so much movement because the hairs are really everywhere. And so so we see that, these wolves are obviously taking advantage of that prey source, and that it's actually showing that, it leads to, that leads to more pups surviving, or less competition within a pack, so more wolves are staying there, or better condition for, the mothers, in order to, whelp and raise and have the pregnancy to add, and have the good nutrition, I guess, during their pregnancy to be successful in raising a larger litter.
What is this distinction made here between number of pups born and the overall population? Like they seem to be disconnected. So during recent caribou and moose population increases, wolf natality increased, yet wolf population size declined. So more pups, less overall population. Explain that a little bit more. How is it that pups do better and individuals do worse?
Yeah, so I thought this was really interesting. It's not necessarily that pups do better, but individuals do worse. But what we saw was that when there was more, animals added to the packs, so packs were growing in size, the population itself. So if we kind of draw a line around our study area and we say this is our population, the population itself wasn't necessarily growing. And I think that what was happening was that there's actually less packs. So each pack may be doing better in terms of adding more pups to the pack, but overall, the packs are using basically more territory. So there's kind of this interesting interaction between. There's this interesting interaction between the population and packs. So the amount of packs that an area can support, and which is kind of indication of the prey base that can support a pack within that area, is kind of a moderating effect of the population as well. So this territoriality, or wolf sociality, is kind of moderating how much that population can grow.
Yeah, it's amazing how they're so adaptable. It's really cool to just hear that, that they can go from a huge ungulate to a small mammal, whether it be beaver or hare or things like that. Do you have a favorite pack that you study? There has to be one in there, or a specific wolf even that, well, no, because I was looking at one of the papers and Bridget listed all the packs that they had studied. I think it was in 21. Is there one that resonates with you? Is there one that you're able to, you have more collars on? What's one? Yeah, out of all of them,
Well, I try not to play favorites.
Of course. So, of course
there are some packs that, because of just how large our study area is, I kind of divide it down into like the eastern and the western pack area, or western regions. And we tend to have a lot more information about wolves in the eastern region, even though both of them we are putting radio collars on, and we are collecting kind of the same type of information location-wise. We get less aerial overflight opportunities to go into those far regions in the kind of far west and southwest of our study area. So we have more opportunities for visual overflight observation, but that's also in the eastern region, that is. But that's also where we have more of our human overlap here. So that's where the road runs through. So we have people who are seeing wolves, and so we have the visual observations of wolves. It's also where we may do some sort of management. So we really want to know where all the den sites are, and when they move from the den sites, where the rendezvous sites are, when they move from the rendezvous sites, because we, from the management perspective, are going to put closures around that in order to minimize human disturbance, so that hikers or pack rafters, just so that people know to stay out of that area, so we can minimize any human impacts in that area. So I do tend to know some of those packs, behavior movements, etc. a little bit, it's probably a little bit more intuitive to me, or like in my brain more often because of that overlay. And so, there are a lot of individual wolves that I think have some really great stories as well. And I don't know if we have time to get into all this. And I was thinking to suggest to you guys actually as a little bit of a follow-up to maybe do to highlight some of those, because I do think there are some really interesting stories. And some of the matriarchs of the packs that we've had have been pretty remarkably long-lived and have had some really interesting observations of them, as a solo wolf killing a caribou, say, or just some of the kind of interesting trajectories that they've had. I think it could be an interesting thing to do. And Kaya Clowder, who is my technician for this project, is a really great storyteller. And I think that could be a really fun follow-up to do about some of the stories.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll talk to you about that after the show. We'll try to get somebody
Yeah.
to do that.
But I would say when you ask kind of about the pack thing, one thing that it made me think of is just in thinking about wolf research and how we understand wolves, often we're looking at things on a population level. So like when you talk with people down in the lower 48, state management is often very much at a population level. And a lot of research is really focused on that. One thing that I've been thinking about from this like Park Service perspective, where we have mandates to manage for natural functioning ecosystems. We want animals to function in the ecosystem as they would with as little human impact as we can manage. Understanding that like ecological function leads me to think more of wolves and how the packs function. So packs are kind of this like inherent like social unit, right? This is the reproductive unit for the population, and understanding how things within packs change from year to year, or how those packs function, and maybe some of the variation between packs, how that all leads to kind of rolls up to the population. I think that's a really interesting area to look at in research. And that's something that we've been looking at with other parks actually, as well as in a collaborative effort. So I was able to go and visit Yellowstone when I was working on my dissertation, when we were actually looking at some of the commonalities that we have in regards to wolf sightings and how harvest or hunting and trapping adjacent to the parks may influence wolf sightings. And, it just kind of became this bigger issue, or this bigger project or collaboration, because we're realizing, hey, these park units are all dealing with some of the same things. And what can we do, or how can we kind of help inform the process and inform our understanding of how we can understand, the role of wolves in naturally functioning ecosystems in parks. And so we can do that kind of across a lot of different areas and look at some of that. So that's been an interesting and ongoing collaboration.
Yeah, you were just mentioning, just basic human impacts on landscapes. I don't think we think about that enough. We think of hiking as having no impact to wildlife in comparison to, let's say, hunting, for example. But in fact, there are tons of recorded impacts of people simply traveling through landscapes. Are there any concrete findings in Denali related to how, what I assume is thousands of hikers, and how that affects populations of animals like wolves or ungulates, and how they might move or behave?
The density of hikers out, off of the road really it's really pretty dispersed, and it's not the high density use that may be seen in some areas of the lower 48. So I would say what we try to manage for, though, is basically closing those areas to minimize, obviously, any disturbance to those animals. But it's also when wolves are centering their activities around an area like a den site or a rendezvous site, not only could we be disturbing them, but repeated exposure could also be, causing habituation and causing,
Right.
them to be so comfortable
Right.
that maybe then the next time they see a hiker, they're going to try to approach it or something. So we're looking at both sides of it, I guess. So we want to minimize really the impact to the wolves, but we also want to make sure that we're keeping those animals, as behaviorally, quote unquote, wild, in order to maintain, the human side of safety as well.
Talk to us about their spatial response to coyotes in Denali.
Yeah, so this is some interesting study that was actually done by two different graduate students that worked here in the park. So Kelly Seavey and then Kaya Clowder, who works here. And they kind of took different approaches to looking at, this interaction between wolves and coyotes. With some information showing that maybe wolves are actually kind of attracted to or using some of the same areas, that coyotes were attracted to or using some of the same areas as wolves, meaning that maybe there was some sort of attraction to them in terms of their ability to maybe find kills and scavenge from them. On the other hand, it's also pretty dangerous for coyotes to use those areas because they can be killed by wolves. So then there's kind of the opposite side of like seeing some evidence that actually maybe they really aren't so attracted to these areas, but we may see some similarities in the wintertime of them using the same areas, but maybe that's more of showing kind of the similarities in like the travel corridors. Like, there's one place it's easy to travel in the winter and it's, along a river corridor and we're going to see, evidence of animals in that area for both reasons. So I think it's a topic that could be gone into in much more depth. And I think Kaya would be a great person, again, to plug her, to talk about some of that because, we had a really interesting study and, she put these cameras out at carcass sites all over across the landscape. And so we were able to capture through these photos the amount of scavenging that was done at these sites, and also catch just a lot of interactions between species as well. So that's a really interesting aspect to go into a little bit more in depth. And
yeah, we will do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that we have 2 more episodes.
Oh,
yeah.
I love this. No, this is awesome, Bridget. I mean, give everybody just, if you can, I don't know if it's super top secret, of what you are going to the symposium.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give everybody a little bit of insight about what you're going to be speaking on? What are sort of the topics you're going to be hitting and possibly the panels that you're going to be a part of?
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to be giving one of the talks on Friday, and I'm going to talk a lot about some of the stuff I talked about today, like about the history of the Denali Wolf Research Project. Again, this is a almost 40-year long project, and represents really one of the longest term terrestrial mammal monitoring projects in the world. Like, there's a huge global significance to what we have here, and I think that not everybody has that in their mind. Even people who are really into understanding wolves, there's so much to it, right? And a lot going on with management and with research in the lower 48. And so I think this is a great opportunity to have an audience of people who are really, the professionals and probably the public as well, that are really passionate and interested in wolves, get an idea about just how globally significant the study here in Denali is, and kind of that role, I think, in from the historical perspective of things as well, how Denali's really kind of been at the forefront of helping us understand the importance of the role of predation in ecosystems and kind of, changing some momentum from, the idea that the only way to manage or approach wolves is through control, to understanding their role as a kind of a vital part of the ecosystem. So I'm really excited to talk about that, and trying to wrap all that up and then talk about some of the like cool research we have as well and what we're learning as I'm realizing and talking to you guys for an hour, like, man, we just kind of touching the surface on some of it. But I'm just really looking forward to sharing some of that information with people. And then I'll also be on a panel, and I touched a little bit about this collaboration as well. That this is a panel where we're looking, it's a multi-park panel where we're looking at some of those commonalities of issues that parks that are looking to, have protected areas for wildlife are dealing with some of the transboundary management issues as well. So the kind of the similarities of that across North America, really.
That's cool. I love it. This is it's great. I like that. I'm sorry we didn't find you guys sooner. I mean, it's kind of like but now that we've spoken with you, and we're definitely going to speak to some of your colleagues up there. I think I'm glad that we're going to have a multi-episode trek across Denali and really get in depth to the research. So this is great. Wait. This is just step one. So this will be fun.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's great. I think it's a good perspective to pull into this, this really broad. I think you guys are already pulling in a really broad range of people that are talking, but there's still a lot, obviously, and not only Denali, but we can even think about other parks and preserves here in Alaska. So Yukon Charlie also has a long-term research project, and so that's another one that has some close ties with Denali in terms of how kind of it started and some of the collaboration that we've been able to do over time. But it's a really different system and really different sort of management issues as well that they deal with. So there's a lot going on here in Alaska that I think it's really fun.
Well, let's just like in your mind, if we did another hour and a half, we're going to give you some time because I know you're busy, and this is the issue with all of our guests. They're all super important and super busy, so we can only we got to kind of run the gamut during the episode, otherwise, But if we did an episode in another, few months, if you're available, and we did an hour and a half, what's like the most important topic in your mind that we could focus on for an hour and a half about Denali wolves that we could really, give full attention to?
Ooh, oh man. I think talking a little bit about the wolf sightings is something, that's really where my dissertation research started. And that started also the collaboration with Yellowstone. I think understanding some of the like big picture commonalities that these areas are facing, and how we think about and look at, and value the ability to see wolves. I think about that sort of stuff, and I think that would be something interesting to talk about more. And then I think, some of those, I think some of the public interest stuff too, like thinking about some of the stories or trajectories of packs or individuals. I know that sort of stuff is really interesting. And I think we've got some really,
it is
some really interesting stories to add to that conversation as well.
No, we're definitely going to put that one.
And you wrote down her,
Kaya.
What was her name again? She was your assistant or something? Kaya, yeah.
Yeah. She's
okay, we need to get her.
Yeah, once we're going to wrap in just a minute, but once we wrap, I want to make sure I get all the information once we finish from you, so we can reach out and do all that stuff. So my last question for you, Bridget, is when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this one because I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and I knew you were going to ask it. And it's a really great one, though. It's super thought-provoking because my first instinct is to say, like, I just picture a wolf, like, out in this kind of fall tundra of like orange and red leaves, just walking across the tundra. That's like that's what I picture. But like what it means, I think, is obviously so much more than that. Like, and I think the word that I came up with is connection. And that's because I think that wolves are, can be really polarizing, obviously. But that polarization is because there's a really strong connection that people have with them, whether it's positive or whether it's negative. There is some inherent thing about wolves that makes us feel connected to them. And that's the only way that we have that level of passion and like even opposition about it, I think. So I think it's a really great way that people feel connected to the wild. I hear a lot of people say that wolves mean the wild to them. And, you know, wolves live in the wild and they live in some areas that like aren't really so wild either. But that's what, what that connection is for people. And for others, it's, you know, it's a connection on maybe another realm. But I think wolves are really powerful in their ability, to inspire connections for people.
Very well said. Bridget, this has been phenomenal. I love, I can't wait to get all the information once we get off here, and we're going to have multiple episodes with you and your colleagues. This is fantastic. So Bridget Borg, thanks for squeezing us in and having this awesome conversation. Really appreciate you. House to all you out there, and Stephen, I'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the Donate tab, and find out more information.